Αγαπητοί φίλοι, είναι μεγάλη τιμή για μας και το ICC να έχουμε σήμερα και να φιλοξενούμε μια τέτοια επιφανή προσωπικότητα, όπως ο Ρίτσαρντ. Το βιογραφικό του σας το έχουμε στείλει, το έχετε πάρει όλοι, δεν θα μπω γιατί είναι κάμποσες σελίδες, ολόκληρο κατεβατό και θέλω να είμαι λακωνικός ως και εκ της πάρτης. Λοιπόν, ο Ρίτσαρντ είναι μείγμα Πορτογάλου, Ινδού και Αυστραλού. Και οπότε φαίνεται αυτό το μείγμα βγήκε πάρα πολύ καλό. Και Richard, thank you very much for being here with us. Είναι από τους top, εκτός από Chief Economist στη Διεθνή Τράπεζα, είναι από τους top experts σε θέματα sustainability, ελλείψεως νερού και όλα τα σχετικά. Και βλέπω ότι και με την είσοδο του Τραμπ στο Λευκό Οίκο, τα γεωπολιτικά έχουν αρχίσει να επηρεάζουν πάρα πολύ τα οικονομικά. Γρυλανδίες, Καναδάς τώρα και Αλμπέρτα, Γάζα, Αργεντινή, Ουκρανία, Τεχεράνη. Όλα αυτά είναι θέματα που επηρεάζουν άμεσα και τα οικονομικά και τα χρηματιστήρια φυσικά. Γι' αυτό πραγματικά περιμένουμε με αγωνία τι θα μας πει σήμερα. Είναι a very exciting day and thank you very much, Richard, for being. I've been advertising for the last 2 minutes. And it's an honor for us to have you here, and I hope you enjoy because we have many good people. Rania Aikaterinari, αντιπρόεδρος του ΣΕΠ και πρόεδρος της δικού σας επιτροπής του ΣΕΠ και έχουμε συνδυαστεί πάρα πολύ μεταξύ μας. Η μητέρα της, η μανούλα της, ήταν στη Βουλή μαζί με εμένα και τον Υπουργό, τον κύριο Σπιωτόπουλο, ο οποίος δεν το λέω υπουργό, το λέω πιλότο F-104 και άλλα αεροπλάνα, τα οποία ήταν το πιο δύσκολο αεροπλάνο να πετάξεις και το λέγανε υπτάμενο φέρετρο, διότι όταν ήταν σε ψηλές ταχύτητες πετούσε μια χαρά, στις χαμηλές ταχύτητες ήταν πάρα πολύ ασταθές και δύσκολο να προσδοστεί. Οπότε σε ευχαριστούμε και ως Υπουργός Άμυνας έκανες Σπύλιο εξαιρετική δουλειά. Αν κανείς παίζει γκολφ, έχουμε και τον πρόεδρο της Ομοσπονδίας Γκολφ, εκεί μπορεί να σας κάνει και καμία έκθεση. Θα ήθελα, πριν δώσω το βήμα στη Ράνια και τη Μαριέτα, την οποία ευχαριστώ, διότι αυτή είναι που προσκάλεσε και ήταν φίλη του Ρίτσαρντ. Να ξέρετε ότι αυτό που κάνουμε σήμερα είναι και μια φοβερή ευκαιρία δικτύωσης για σας. Θα γνωρίζετε εξαιρετικό κόσμο και αν κλείσετε κάνα deal επειδή δικτυωθήκατε σήμερα, το 5% στον Damania μας, τον κύριο Στράτο 40 στον Damania, όχι 2-5 το κάνουμε εμείς. Αυτό και καλή συνέχεια. Δίνω το βήμα στη Μαριέτα. And Richard, I'm giving you one of the books I wrote on business and empire. So you have some memento of today. Thank you very much. Marietta, λόγος εξέλι.
So I'll continue in English in favor of Richard. So before I hand over the floor to Ms. Aikaterinari and Richard, I would like to share a personal note about our journey together. Richard and I go back a long, maybe decades actually. We both studied economics at university, and even then it was clear how deeply dedicated he was to understanding the systems that govern our world. While many of us were focused on passing exams, including myself, Richard was thinking much bigger. He was committed to showing that sustainable development practices are not just ideals, but can be rigorously grounded in science derived from careful economic modeling and empirical analysis. Even during those long study sessions, while he was working on his PhD and I was pursuing my master's, I constantly interrupted him, and yet he remained patient most of the times, not all of them, generous with his time, always focused on his commitment to his science. He has this remarkable ability to pass that perspective on to others, including me. His dedication taught me to approach sustainability with the same rigor, seeking the links between economics, policy, and practical outcomes. What makes this event even more special for me is that some 40 years later, we both find ourselves working in the same field, trying to apply those same principles to real-world challenges, connecting economic insight with sustainable in practice. To me, that is a testament not only to Richard's brilliance, but to the lasting impact of his mentorship, curiosity, and integrity. So thank you, Richard. It's also a great honor to welcome and introduce Ms. Rania Aikaterinari, as the chairman said, vice president of the board and president of the executive committee of SEV. SEV has long been at the forefront of integrating sustainable practices into economic development, and Ms. Aikaterinari has been a driving force in this mission. With decades of experience in finance, energy, and corporate governance, she brings a unique perspective on how business can grow responsibly while embracing growth. Her leadership, both in Greece and internationally, continues to inspire companies to align economic success with environmental and social responsibility. Chair or member of key board committees such as audit, nomination, remuneration, and many more, bringing strategic governance experience to the heart of business decision-making. So we're truly honored to have her with us today, and I would like to welcome her on the podium. Thank you.
Καλησπέρα. Πέτρο και Μαριέτα, θα το καταφέρω να το βάλω. Ναι. Πέτρο και Μαριέτα, ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πρόσκληση σήμερα. Είναι ιδιαίτερα τιμή και χαρά να είμαι μαζί σας για ένα θέμα που μας απασχολεί όλους μας. Νομίζω είναι πολύ μεγάλη τιμή και για το ICC και για την Ελλάδα να έχουμε σήμερα τον Richard Damania μαζί μας, γιατί έχουμε πολλά και ενδιαφέροντα να συζητήσουμε μαζί του. Το sustainability είναι κάτι που μας απασχολεί όλους. Η Ευρώπη πρώτη πρωτοστάτησε με το Green Deal, την Πράσινη Συμφωνία, και ακολούθησαν και πολλές άλλες μετά πολιτικές και ρυθμίσεις που όλοι γνωρίζουμε. Παρ' όλα αυτά, εγώ προσωπικά και οι επιχειρήσεις αισθανόμαστε σαν είμαστε σε αυτό το green transition, ότι είμαστε σε έναν μακρύ, στενό διάδρομο που όλοι θέλουμε να κάνουμε το βήμα μπροστά. Έχουμε φτάσει στα μισά αυτού του διαδρόμου. Έχουμε κάνει πολλά, έχουμε διανύσει πολλά σαν Ευρώπη για να απανθρακοποιήσουμε την οικονομία μας και να σεβαστούμε το περιβάλλον. Αλλά φαίνεται ότι αυτός ο διάδρομος είναι πολύ μακρύς. Το φως στο τέλος του τούνελ δεν φαίνεται. Και οι επιπτώσεις και για τις ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις και για τον Ευρωπαίο πολίτη, ειδικά και από το μεγάλο κόστος που έχει το CO2 στους λογαριασμούς ρεύματος, νομίζω τα ξέρετε και τα διαβάζετε όλες, είναι πάρα πολλές. Άρα αυτό σιγά σιγά έχει και μια επίπτωση όχι μόνο στην ανταγωνιστικότητα των ελληνικών επιχειρήσεων, αλλά και στην τσέπη και στον πληθωρισμό και στην ποιότητα ζωής των Ευρωπαίων πολιτών. Θα μου επιτρέψετε να γυρίσω στα αγγλικά, γιατί θα βάλω και κάποια ερωτήματα μέσα από το λόγο μου στο Richard, οπότε θα ξεκινήσω το λόγο μου στα αγγλικά. So Richard, we're all living through a period of profound global disruption, rising geopolitical tensions, fragile supply chains, volatile energy prices, AI everywhere, increasing inequalities, aging population in Europe, more authoritative regimes, and weakening status of the global institutions are shaping the landscape around us. Climate change adaptation, water stress, and biodiversity loss are no longer abstract or distant risks. They're tangible risks that require our urgent attention. In this environment, the question of sustainable economic growth is a profoundly strategic one, not just with respect to our competitors, but for our own prosperity and existence. The economy does not exist outside nature. And now that the latter is in crisis, sustainability is no longer a matter of good intentions. Instead, it is a core determinant of our economy's resilience, competitiveness, and our ability to create economic and social capital. I recently read something that reminded me how much ancient Greek thought is relevant in today's world. Hippocrates did not only speak about people's health, but also about the sustainability of systems. A system, he argued, does not survive by becoming powerful. It survives by learning not to turn against itself. Systems endure through balance, not excess. This moderation protects them from the illusion that they can expand exponentially without cost. And that's more relevant than ever today. When natural systems deteriorate, costs rise, and entire sectors face growing operational and financial risks. Already, industrial production is being disrupted in regions affected by water scarcity. Supply chains are increasingly exposed to climate change. Insurance markets are repricing risk. Investment decisions are being reshaped by ecosystem degradation and resource insecurity. For business and the industry, this is a moment of truth. They can either try and anticipate these shifts and invest in resilience, efficiency, and innovation, or they can treat sustainability as a compliance exercise, facing the risk of higher costs, operational disruption, and even lost markets. A similar issue also arises for public policy makers, because although no one really doubts the necessity of sustainable development and sustainability policies, but identifying and implementing policies and common approaches with real-world results at scale and with speed is something which still, until today, and especially for Europe, remains tricky. Europe has rightly chosen to lead the green transition with its ambition frameworks such as the Green Deal, Fit for 55, and lately the Clean Industrial Deal. Greece and its businesses are aligned with these European goals. We have national goals on carbon emissions, energy transition, and water, and many of our businesses are already investing in cleaner technologies and circular economy models. But at the same time, we have to admit that Europe's approach is disproportionately based on regulation and reporting instead of targeted investment and a speedy execution of the required transformation. Over the last years, thousands of pages of new rules have been produced. Compliance costs from CSRD and CSDDD have skyrocketed, and the Clean Industrial Deal, although it was a good first attempt, does not adequately address the risk of European industries losing their competitiveness. As a result, companies are forced to divert resources from real investments to paperwork and compliance. This would not necessarily be a problem if the results had a meaningful impact on a global scale, but this does not seem to be the case so far. I read the book of Rich and with the example of air pollution. The data in Dr. Damanian report shows that when China is excluded, pollution and global PM 2.5 trends remain largely flat. So basically, without China, progress on air pollution, unless I read the diagram wrong, is not improving. China makes the difference in terms of improving CO2 emissions in air. Europe has reduced its emissions, but with limited global impact. This raises a difficult but necessary question. Are the policies we are designing, especially in Europe, maximizes real-world impact, or do we need to do something different? Shall we take the example of China? Because China reduced and keep reducing pollution without derailing growth and proved that decoupling is possible under center provisions. That it should be based on the right policy designs, investment, innovation, boost of productivity, and execution capacity. The key, therefore, question is how do we do systemic change? We need stronger institutions, data-driven implementation, and policies aligned with industrial strategy. We all agree that we must advance decarbonization, but we must do so without jeopardizing European competitiveness or creating carbon leakage risks and the transfer of European industries outside of Europe. As recent Eurostat data show, European share of consumption emissions as a percentage of total emissions has increased between 2020 and 2023 from 31% to 35%. That, in other words, means that European industries are leaving Europe, they're going outside Europe, and they're being substituted by imports from other countries which are more carbon intensive. So we consume products from industries outside Europe that are more carbon intensive. And Europe is losing both jobs because they're closing, the industries are closing, and also competitiveness. I will mention two examples which, in my mind, Europe needs to address and which, of course, they're not exhaustive. The first example concerns Greece. Our country's serious decarbonization efforts have reduced the carbon intensity of electricity generation in Greece by 20%. I remind you, rig-light plants have closed down. We're connecting the islands, so we're shutting down the diesel plants in the islands, and we have a high penetration of renewables. So our carbon intensity reduced by 20% since 2020. However, the wholesale electricity prices are increasing, and so does the charges, for example, charges linked to network costs or charges for balancing the power market. Although renewables have near to zero marginal cost and do not depend on fossil fuel supply chains and commodity price volatility due to geopolitical risks, Electricity prices are still, not only in Greece but also in Europe, are still set through the merit order, and they're not decoupled from fossil fuel electricity prices. This teaches us that although high renewables penetration and clean technology could make, and we all hope to make, energy cheaper and more predictable, this will take a long time to happen. And this also provides that the power system designs, the rules and the design of the power system has to evolve also along the way. A second example relates to AI. The rapid penetration of AI is extremely energy intensive, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have the data centers operating, and all of us were having a ChatGPT search 24 hours, 7 days a week. With advanced cooling systems that also require, so these operations, they require, it's energy intensive. The advanced cooling systems increase demand of water while there is growing pressure for certain critical raw materials. Data centers are already amongst the fastest growing sources of electricity use in our country as well. And if such systems are powered by baseload fossil fuel generation capacity, emissions would again grow very quickly. So the question is, will the efficiency gains from AI deployment exceed its energy and materials intensive use? That's a difficult question, but I'm just putting it to you. So this brings us to a broader point, a point that SEF has put very high on the agenda. It's called productivity. SEF stresses the need to increase productivity as a key priority for policymakers and as a key criteria for providing investment incentives, because rising productivity is the most viable way to increase wages, to preserve our social model in Europe while remaining competitive. It is also crucial for the preservation of our natural systems, because low productivity economies, even if they have the best intentions to protect the environment, simply they cannot afford it. When productivity stalls, sustainability suffers. This brings me to the role of the World Bank. For decades, the bank has highlighted the environment's role as a foundation of development, economic stability, and poverty reduction. The central message of Dr. Damanian's report, Reboot Development, the Economics of a Livable Planet, is both simple and profound. Undermining natural capital means undermining the development model itself. This is not an ideological argument. This is profoundly a strategic and an economic one. Economic growth and environmental protection can be aligned, provided they rely on better institutions and policies that integrate nature directly into economic decision-making. Dr. Damanian's approach goes far beyond compliance and reporting. It calls for a deeper economic integration of sustainability, where forest, water, and clean air are treated as productive capital and not as regulatory checkbox. The World Bank's recommendation focus on what actually works, real-time data, policy alignment across sectors, and continuous evaluation to improve and scale what actually delivers results. Europe seems to be finally moving to that direction since beginning of 2025, following the Letta and the Draghi report, with initiatives such as the Clean Industrial Deal and the renewed focus on competitiveness and productivity. Since January 2025, the European Commission has presented 10 omnibus proposals aiming to significantly relieve companies by reducing the regulatory burden with these proposals by 12 million. However, the new proposals which are coming are under negotiation. They're going to add 70 billion if something, not for sustainability, in general. So yes, they're reducing by 12 million, but another 70 million are along the way. Omnibus 1 in particular, which relates also to sustainability, allows for significant simplification on the scope of CBAM, CSRD, CSRDDD, and on downstream due diligence and reporting standards. At the same time, the new multi-annual financial framework, which is basically the European budget for the next period 2028-2035 proposal, recognizes the need to strengthen Europe's competitiveness by better aligning reforms with investments and by linking cohesion policies more directly to decarbonization priorities of the European Union. But there is still much that needs to be done to reduce red tape, accelerate green investments, and turn ambition into real transformation in Europe. Dr. Damania, your work inspires us to reboot growth, not with fewer goals, but with better design, less bureaucracy, more speed, predictability, and investments. Sustainable transition isn't a checklist. It's a strategy for stronger European and Greek businesses and for social prosperity. We at SEV and its Business Council for Sustainable Development have long championed this shift, helping businesses move from compliance to strategic action on climate, circularity, and resilience. Because real stress begins when economy moves from exhausting natural resources to respecting them with a view to sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Έχουμε μεταξύ μας και τον πρέσβη του Λιβάνου, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being here, και τον πρώην συνάδελφο υπουργό, τον κύριο Φόλια, και καλώ στο βήμα τον κύριο Ρίτσαρντ Damania, ο οποίος θα ήθελα να μας πει και για ένα λεπτό, Richard, about your private sector financing, γιατί υπάρχει και τομέας στην Διεθνή Τράπεζα που χρηματοδοτεί ιδιωτικές επιχειρήσεις και κυβερνήσεις φυσικά. If you can, for a minute, just tell us about what's happening with the geopolitics, the way you see them, την ανυπαρξία της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης απέναντι στον Τραμπ, για την obvious ανυπαρξία που υπάρχει, relations with Argentina, Greenland, Ukraine, and what have you. So thank you very much. We're honored to have you here. Και παρακαλώ, ευχαριστούμε όλοι τον Richard για να μας κάνει την τιμή να είναι εδώ μαζί του.
Thank you so much, Petros. Thank you, Rania, for that excellent speech. In fact, I probably don't have to say anything because Rania has said it all. So you can just enjoy your meal and all go home now. No, it's a genuinely, ladies and gentlemen, it is a true honor to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Marietta for making it happen. Thank you to Petros. Thank you to Rania. And thank you all of you for being here. So I'm not going to comment on the politics because where I work, we're not allowed to comment on politics. We do economics and we do development. But notwithstanding that, the world that we are in today, you clearly not only want to reboot development, but you want to reboot the economy. And what we will focus on is sustainability through the lens purely of the economy. And except for one slide, everything that I show you is data. So nothing is made up. This is just fact as it is. And if people didn't know it, no one bothered to put it together. So I'm sorry, some of you might have to crane your necks a little bit, but it's the screen you want to look at and not me, which is a plus, right? So, you know, some of you might want to shift there, perhaps that might be necessary. So we're going to talk about the economy. And let's take a big picture of the economy over 50 or 100 years. Consider any set of statistics of the economy that you want over 50 years, and you will observe that the world is doing well. The economy is progressing. If we take something very basic, no one likes to live in poverty. If you take the global poverty rate, in 1980, 40% of people lived in poverty. Today, that number is 8.6%. Most of you were alive in 1980. And within our lifetime, we've seen a massive reduction in poverty, despite what people complain about. Take something else. In 1980, compared to now, infant mortality, that is the death of children, including in Europe, but globally has fallen 70%. Today, over 90% of people have running hot water, reasonably clean water, and access to electricity. At the time of our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers, running hot water in your house was deemed a luxury. Now everyone has it. You will see in the newspapers images of people going hungry. But you know we produce enough food to feed everyone. We produce 3,000 kilocalories per person per day. That's more than enough for all of us to have a very round stomach. So if anyone is going hungry, it's an affordability problem, or it's a consequence of war, or it's a consequence of access. It's not food supply. The truth of the matter is, for humanity, there's never been a better time to be alive, despite the chaos in terms of the pure economics, the resources we have, the access and the cheapness of them. There's never been a better time to be alive. But that has come at a very big price. Now, all of you have seen these charts about temperature going up, sea level rise going up. I'm not going to bore you with that. I want you to think in terms of the price on the environment about something else. Let's compare the weight or the biomass of all mammals on Earth. And let's compare the weight or the biomass of wild mammals, wild animals, with humans and what we eat. Think about it, wild mammals. We're thinking about things like elephant, even deer, they're massive, tigers, lions. So you would think wild mammals, the total weight would be 40%, 70%, 80%, right? These are big, big things. What is it in reality? 5% of the weight of all mammals is wild mammals, as you see on the screen there. The other 95% is humans and what we eat. 60% of the weight of mammals is what we eat. That's a very big footprint. So is that normal? Was it always like this? Go back into history, go back into 1850. That's when we had reasonable data. In 1850, 50% of the weight was wild animals. Today it's down to 5% and it is declining. That has been the force of economic progress on the environment. And it's not just wild mammals and it's not just biodiversity that has shrunk. Entire Earth systems are in stress. And scientists have a way of describing this called planetary boundaries. They use fancy language that we are not familiar with, but it's just land, air, and water. And if you look at that sort of map that you've got over there, you will see that we're in the red zone in 7 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. That means we're in the danger zone when it comes to land, when it comes to air, when it comes to pollution, when it comes to water, when it comes to climate change. So the impact of economic progress on the planet has been huge. If the impact has been that big, we need to ask ourselves the question is, who is impacted? This will have some consequence on you, on the environment, and on someone. So let's begin to tease this out a little bit. Let's take 3 things that we need fundamentally to have a decent life. If you're going to have an economy that succeeds and feeds its people, you need to have fertile land. You also need water, because without water, frankly, not only can you not grow, but everything becomes expensive, including industry. We need water for everything, cooling data centers, energy production, and so on. And let's look at air quality. Why air quality? This is this hidden killer. More people die from bad air quality globally than all wars and all forms of violence put together. So despite Ukraine, despite the Middle East, despite everything that's happening, more people today are dying because of bad air quality than all the wars, all the homicides, all the murders, all the violence across the world put together. And not only are people dying, not only is their life shortened, but if you go out and run, for example, on a day with bad air quality, your performance will be worse. What we find globally is that judges perform worse on days when air quality goes down. Productivity declines of lawyers, of accountants, of academics, and so on. It affects economic productivity, so there's a clear economic impact. So let's start simply. Let's begin by asking ourselves the question is, where in the world do you at the same time get bad land, bad air, bad water? So all 3 together, bad land, bad air, bad water. So if you look at the orange line there, what it tells you, if you're in a low-income country, 80% of people simultaneously have bad land, bad air, bad water. In high-income countries, that's only 1%. What that means is these countries simply will not develop as long as they don't look after their environment. What it also means is we should stop looking at these issues of land, air, and water as being environmental issues. These are economic issues, right? No water means you can't do much agriculture. It means you can't do much industry. Water is expensive in your house. Bad air, we've already explained. Bad land, it's obvious. You don't have fertile land, you can't produce much. But don't feel too contented and too happy. Oh, this is only a problem for developing countries. Low-income countries, 80% of people. Let's flip the question and ask ourselves, who has at least one of these problems on the globe? Bad land, bad air, bad water. And it turns out, 90% of people in the world are exposed to at least one of those stresses. And I want to here for a moment focus, and much of this talk will be focused on water. What you're seeing in front of you is a map of what's called total water storage. This comes from the NASA satellite data, so it's very accurate. Where you see red, you are losing water. We're looking at all water, surface water, groundwater, glaciers together, from the top to the very bottom. And what you will see is the southern Mediterranean is very red. It's as red as places you would not expect, Middle East, Pakistan, etc. This part of the world is losing water at an enormously rapid rate. And it's not just climate change, it's also usage, right? Because certainly climate is not helping in many ways. Climate is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, with climate change, we're getting more rainfall because there's more heat, more clouds, more rain. But on the other hand, we're also getting more precipitation. More of it is actually going up. So the pure climate effect could go either way. The main problem is the usage effect. So we can't be sanguine about it and say, this is not a problem for us. Water is really, really important. So this is water quantity. Let's go to water quality. And by the way, this is from another book that we wrote a while ago, and we do start off with the Hippocrates quote, because he spoke about water as well and water quality. Here we look at the major water pollutants that you have, and again you see a lot of the rich countries in the world are suffering from at least one of the bad pollutants. And for around here, a lot of that, when I mean here, I mean Europe and North America, a lot of that is a nitrogen problem. If we look at the problems of land degradation, I'm sure you recognize which part of the world this is in this map. You'll see bits of red that you probably already knew about. That's where your land is degrading. Again, you get degrading land unless you're going to invest a lot. That's going to impair your agricultural productivity. In some, not in an altogether good state. And if you're not in a good state, and I'm going to come back to this, on all of these sorts of issues, this is going to affect your economy. But I want us to focus much more on two things which are absolutely critical because they affect everyone, and things that I suspect most of you didn't know about. We're going to look at the links between land and water. They're both very important. We will go to industry and energy later on, time permitting. Okay, let's start by asking ourselves a very simple, obvious question. Where does rainfall come from? Clouds. Where do clouds come from? Oceans, right? You know, you get heat, you get clouds formed in the ocean, and that becomes rain. That is only 50% of your rain. Where does the other 50% of your rainfall come from globally? It comes from forests. It comes from biomass. So forests breathe, they transpire. That forms clouds. The clouds will blow 5 miles away, in the Amazon up to 2,000 miles away, and it produces rainfall. Now, what does this imply? This implies that if I destroy my trees over here, say some part of this northern Mediterranean region or wherever, I'm affecting rainfall of someone else somewhere else. In other words, the water that you have is linked to how you manage your land. And we have never really recognized that, and the science is relatively new. So now we know the science, let's do the economics on this. I can tell you now, because the data is so good, if you have a reduction in rainfall, did that reduction in rainfall come because of trees being destroyed, deforestation, or because the wind changed? And where you see in these maps red dots, we've lost rainfall because of deforestation. And I'm focusing here much more on the Amazon because a lot of deforestation in the Amazon. Also the Congo region, the major forests are over there. And of course, parts of Indonesia and East Asia where you also have a little bit of forest left. And every dot tells you you've lost rainfall because of deforestation. So what happens when you lose rainfall? Two things. If you've got hydropower, you have less hydropower energy. We can compute that, we can count that. Agriculture, in the dry season, you get less rainfall, your crops are going to suffer. We've got very, very good satellite data to measure what the loss of agriculture is. Both of those have a knock-on effect on the economy, and we can calculate what happens to your growth, to your GDP. And you're seeing some examples over there. The bottom line is, we won't go into the detail, a lot of variability. If you have trees and you're destroying those trees, you suffer bigger losses. If you have no trees, like the MENA region, for example, Middle East, you're not going to suffer. but those numbers are very large and we've ignored them. Let's look at something else which is much more important, and I would hazard to suggest especially important for Greece. And let's look at where the rain goes when it falls. Where does the rain go? Well, quite obviously, you all know, right? The rain goes into a river, it goes into a lake, it goes into groundwater. That is only 35% of where your rain goes. Where does the rest of your rain sit? It sits in soils as soil moisture, and sometimes that is called green water. This has profound implications, because when we think about water management, we only ever think about the 35%. We never worry about where most of your rainfall is sitting, which is in soil moisture, the 65%. And this is important globally because most of our food is not irrigated, so it relies on rain-fed agriculture, so it relies on managing that 65% soil moisture. And yet our understanding of it is pretty meager. It's only just beginning to happen. So let's ask ourselves the question, what determines soil moisture? Firstly, how you farm. You can farm very badly and destroy it. You can farm very well and retain it. We're not farmers here. We won't talk about that. We'll talk about something else. The vegetation around your farm will determine soil moisture. It turns out that when you have a forest, the forest will act as a sponge, which preserves soil moisture. Why? You've got a canopy of trees. The canopy of trees will slow the rainfall, and that means you get more absorption into the soil. You have roots. The roots will spread water, will spread moisture from areas wet to areas dry. You really see that on the edge of a forest. And finally, if you've ever walked in a forest, which I'm sure all of you have, you will notice it's always cooler, it's always more moist. And that's because you have this layer, if you like, of leaves called mulch, which retains the moisture. So what actually happens is when you have an upstream forest and you have a farm downstream, if you have trees on the hills and you've got a farm downstream, what you tend to find in the dry season, your farm will have more soil moisture. And because you've got more soil moisture, your agriculture performs better. Your yields are better. The data is so good now, this data is about 2.5 years old, as you know where the trees are, you can now measure the soil moisture and you can see the correlation. And then we've also got data, satellite data, very good on what's happening to agricultural yields, so we can measure that and draw the correlations, do the econometrics, do the statistics, and work out what's happening. And indeed, that is exactly what we do. And what we see is very, very big losses from deforestation for soil moisture. This is purely economics, right? So we're not talking about forests because of carbon sequestration. We are not talking about forests because of biodiversity, much as we may love it. We're talking about forests because it is a source of your profitability as a farmer. And as we know, farmers all over the world are usually not doing terribly well, right? They have to be subsidized, nurtured, etc., etc. So this is important, and we haven't recognized it. Once you know this, then you can begin to ask more sophisticated questions. And you can ask, does the type of forest matter? And we do that, and for those of you that are either foresters or that are ecologists, you will know that the type of forest will matter. A natural forest gives you much more soil moisture and is much better at retaining soil moisture than is a plantation. You know, plantations often do a lot of environmental harm. We won't go into all of that. We don't have time for those sorts of things. Okay, I'm going to skip a lot of stuff about nitrogen because I realize that we're running late. So the billion, not the $100 trillion question for us is, can we grow our economies without doing what we have been doing? It's destroying the environment, destroying biodiversity, climate change, the water resources. You saw how your water resources here are going down. That will have an economic impact. This is what we need to do. And if the answer is we cannot do it, if we cannot decouple, divorce economic development, making money from environmental damage, we have a very difficult trade-off before us. It's not a happy choice. So let's try to address this problem head on. But because I'm an economist, I will lead you through some economic thinking in how we do it. Then we'll bring the data to the problem and we'll see what we've done and we'll see if we've got a chance. And just to tell you, we have a very good chance. So you don't have to be depressed. One piece of good news in this world that's about us. Think about it. All else equal, hold everything constant, grow your economy. If you grow your economy, you're going to use more goods and resources, and you're going to pollute more, right? So as the scale of your economy increases, you go from having 2 million cars to having 20 million cars. You're using more resources, you're going to get more pollution. So in that sense, with the scale effect, growth leads to more pollution, more resource usage. But when you grow, other things change as well. The composition of what you demand changes. So it could be the case that as you get richer, you buy more land. You can turn that land into, I don't know, a golf course, or you can rewild the land and return it back to nature, right? You own all this land. So the composition of what you're doing as you grow also changes. As an example, we know as people and countries get richer, they want to eat more protein. That protein can come from a cow in the Amazon with all the impacts, or it can come from soybean with a much lighter impact. Which is it going to be? It's an empirical issue. Secondly, as Rania emphasized, productivity efficiency matters. As we get richer, are we saying I'm so rich I can afford to buy a car that's really inefficient and pollute a lot? Or will it be the case because I'm so rich I'm going to buy a really sophisticated Mercedes EV, or I don't know if Rolls-Royce produces an EV, but maybe a Rolls-Royce EV or whatever it might be. So are we going to just leave the lights on and the heating on in our house all the time because we are rich? Or are we going to have, better central heating, more efficient heating, etc.? Again, empirical issue. So let's look at land, water, air, greenhouse gases. Look at the world. We've got individual results for 121 countries. That's just about the whole world. And let's look at what's happened. So just focus in that diagram, if you like, on greenhouse gas or air pollution. I'm assuming you can see it broadly. So you see it, you're seeing a lot of orange there, and that is the scale effect. So as you grow, we're saying you pollute more, all else equal, you use more resources. Just call that the scale effect. Give it a number, call it 100. Then we said as you get richer, you might be consuming and producing more polluting goods or less polluting goods. Which is it? We see with the composition effect, generally less polluting. So we are doing better things as we get richer, but not very much. What about efficiency? Now we are so super rich. Are we going to buy really, really fuel inefficient cars or fuel efficient cars? Are we going to insulate our homes or not? What does the productivity say? That is huge. So as we've grown richer, we've become much, much more efficient, and that has allowed us to offset the impacts of economic growth. And this is really, really good news. And it's really good news because we are really inefficient at what we do. And now I'm going to tell you just maybe three stories, before I conclude on the story of inefficiency. Nitrogen. I mean, historically, the southern Mediterranean has had a lot of problem with nitrogen fertilizer. You overuse nitrogen, that goes into water as a nitrate, and that can cause a lot of sickness. Everything from blue baby syndrome, which if it's over 50 milligrams per liter, it's lethal to infants. They turn blue, the blood supply doesn't flow. But also at lower doses, you see correlations with cancers of the colon, cancers of the thyroid, which is why all over the world there's strict regulations on nitrogen. But we also need nitrogen because without nitrogen fertilizer, the world wouldn't have as much food as it does. It is really powerful, it's really important. And as a consequence, nitrogen fertilizer the world over is subsidized. So what you see in this graph in front of you is the application of nitrogen fertilizer on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis, yields or productivity. What you see is we reach a stage where globally we are putting so much nitrogen down that yields are actually declining. In other words, we are damaging the chemistry of the soil. You're putting too much of the fertilizer, more than is good for your crops, and you're hurting your crops. So we can be more efficient. You can save on the government subsidy. My friends from the central bank, wherever they're sitting, we're very happy there. Save on the government spending. You also put down less fertilizers, that's saving for the farmer, and you get an increase in yields. So efficiency gives you a boost, and a boost also to the environment. Now, very quickly, something that Rania said, but just to show you that graph. Remember we said that pollution is the big killer, kills more people than all wars? If you looked at the pollution exposure curve across the whole world, it looks like this. It's going down. Let's just do one thing and remove China from this graph. If you remove China from this graph, you see the graph is going up. So China had declared a war on air pollution, had the most rapid reduction in air pollution the world has ever seen, and it continued to grow. So China managed to reduce air pollution massively. I can promise you usually the air quality in Beijing is very clean, skies are very blue, but it continued to grow and grow very, very rapidly with it. So we can decouple. Therein lies the evidence. Of course, not everyone can do what China does, but it is possible. We worry about jobs. So this is the only modeled result. Very quickly, I'll end in about 2 minutes. What we did was we took a standard model and we said, divide the world into more polluting and less polluting sectors. And you see putting $1 million into less polluting sectors gives you more jobs. And it employs more female workers, which is obviously a very good thing. So it is not the case that if Europe were to go green, we would lose all jobs. There would be different jobs, surely. There's a transition cost, surely. But it doesn't mean that there are no jobs by going green. And then finally, I have to say, don't worry about these numbers. Governments spend very inefficiently. Globally, there's $1 trillion in subsidies that do harm to the environment and harm to the economy. And what we argue in the report is politically, it's very difficult to remove a subsidy, right? Every time we did a big survey, every time governments have tried, they've either been voted out or else they've had to reverse course, right? So what we argue is use the same spending money, but repurpose the subsidy, give the money to the same person, but change what you're giving it for. Get them to do good, increase productivity, not to do harm. But what I want to talk about is a possible green transition in Europe and the EU. And the motivation for talking about this is not only all of you are business people and will have the key role to play in the green transition, but if you look at Europe as a whole, let's be really honest about this. Europe is not oil rich. Europe will have to keep importing oil. And I know I don't talk about politics, but that comes with risks in many dimensions. So it makes economic sense, huge economic sense, to reduce your dependence on oil. And that really is, and putting in other ways, a green transition. But the truth be told, the green transition will not happen on its own. It will take a lot of government effort, and it will take all your fantastic entrepreneurship skills that you have. And I've been so impressed listening to what all of you do. And what economists, they call economics a dismal science. They're always depressed. You look at economists, they're always, hang dog, and they look like they've come out of a psychiatrist's ward or something, So they've named something called the Valley of Death, that you guys, you entrepreneurs have this fantastic idea, but you don't get funding for it. And the idea dies, good ideas die in this Valley of Death. So how do we overcome the Valley of Death? So I'm going to give you one example because it's the most mature green transition, which is solar power, and we'll work through it. Now, let's just think about the energy sector because it's going to be fundamental to the green transition. We want people to move towards greener forms of power. We have two choices. They're not mutually exclusive. We can make green power, solar power, wind power cheaper, which has been the policy in much of Europe and the EU. Or we can try to subsidize industries, give you some cheap money to set up a factory somewhere in Europe to build what it takes to go do the green transition. That's the supply side. The second is what China has done, industry policy, subsidies. Korea has done it, etc., right? So let's ask ourselves the question is which works better? And solar power, as I said, it's so mature, everything has rolled itself out. We get a good inkling of what's happening. Remember, China has what's called by economists a supply-side policy, which means you want to do something on solar power, I'll give you cheap loans, or I'll give you cheap factory or land, all sorts of things, right? The research support and so on. So China has filed a lot of patents, new ideas for solar power. What you see in the red over there, this is a very important graph, What you see in the red are the patents filed by China. It's massive. It beats the patents filed by everyone anywhere in the world, right? As a consequence of that, China has brought the price of solar power down. This is a massive reduction in solar power that we've actually seen, such that in many, many countries today it is competitive with coal, it's competitive with oil. Without that support, the price would not, clearly not have come down this way, right? To make going green and using solar power in some places, not everywhere, competitive. So then the next question to ask ourselves is, has that been enough? How much diffusion or how much take-up of solar power have we seen across the world? And what we would expect is countries that have a lot of sunshine and countries that have a lot of land should use more solar power. So let's look at that. If we look at this, this will be just about my last slide. If we look at the solar power, who's adopting solar power, what you basically see is the countries with the most sun are adopting the least solar power. Which makes no sense. It should be the other way around, including my country, Australia, right? Massive amounts of land, massive amounts of sun, and yet we've got a massive dependence on coal, which kind of makes no sense either. So diffusion matters, the demand side also matters. So we need a combination of both. And what we don't have now is very many countries that do both, are subsidizing the demand side as well as the supply side. And if you do that, you can actually have, if you like, a big business, a big export business, as well as a massive internal market in the European Union for going green. But doing what we've been doing and staying the way we are does seem like not the optimal strategy, because you don't have the resources, you don't have the oil, you'll always be dependent. So making this transition does make sense, and it should be viewed as a business opportunity. The last time I was in China, I was on the podium with some very high up official, and the vision over there is going green is not about the environment. It is purely about jobs. It is purely about business. It is purely about exports and the health of its people. And that's the mindset that we need as we go forward to have a better Europe and a Europe that everyone wants to come to, which they do anyway. But the chances are good. Thank you so much.
Πραγματικά εκπληκτική ομιλία. Πράγματι και πράγματα που δεν έχουμε ξανακούσει και δεν τα ακούμε τόσο γρήγορα και τόσο εύκολα μέσα στις γενικολογίες της Ελλάδος. Όπως σας είπα, είναι μείγμα Πορτογάλου, Ινδού και Αυστραλού. Και η συνταγή βγήκε, από ό,τι φαίνεται, πολύ καλή. Richard, would you be able to answer just a couple of questions? Και μιας και έχω το μικρόφωνο, να ρωτήσω εγώ την πρώτη. Solar is a bit ugly in terms of you have a whole forest of panels and it's efficient, but it's ugly. What about mini compact nuclear plants for every city? It seems to be more green than anything else, because even solars or windmills need a lot of construction, bridges, routes, and what have you. Mini nuclear plants could be a solution, especially for poorer countries. So, any ideas of that? Thank you. Rene, you have a question, and Achilles, you have a question, and Adoni, you have 4 questions here. Okay. Or you can speak loudly. Or there's a microphone. Okay.
Okay.
Please make
Hi.
the questions short.
It will be short. Hello. With the United States pulling out of the Paris Accords and the present occupant of the White House claiming that climate change is a hoax, what does that bode for the rest of the world? And the second question I want to ask you is that there is a case before the Supreme Court regarding Monsanto, and I want to know what you think that will affect if it's pro-Monsanto for the problem of these nitrate fertilizers. Thank you.
Should I take one more? Why don't we take one more?
It's a pleasure and privilege to have you here, Richard. My name is Konstantinos Aggelis Kanelopoulos. I hold a PhD in political economy. I thought you cannot do economics without politics, so forgive me for saying that we economists have to stay out of politics. My question goes off of what Petros said, specifically about nuclear energy being a taboo. And right now we're meeting increasing energy demand. The statistic that I have here is that AI data centers use as much as 100,000 households. Largest data centers consume 20 times more. So this brings me to my first question. Can a livable planet realistically meet the surge in energy demand that we're experiencing without reopening the debate vis-a-vis nuclear energy, particularly small modular reactors or compact reactors? And specifically, since you represent the World Bank, isn't it about time for the World Bank to kind of not think no longer about nuclear as a taboo technology, but rather as a transitional public good in a climate constrained model? And then the second question has to do about, we know that there was a Washington consensus, a Beijing consensus, and a Brussels consensus. Are we moving towards a new paradigm? You could call it the London consensus, where we're focusing more on a livable planet and growth is measured in different ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are all very good, very difficult questions. A lot of emphasis on compact nuclear. For those that don't know, this is a relatively new technology where we don't have to invest in this massive, massive nuclear plant, which is hugely expensive, by the way, big capital costs, and also takes up a lot of resources and land, and takes 15, 20 years sometimes to build or more, right? Which kind of the lag itself is problematic. It is argued that these compact nuclear plants overcome a lot of those problems, and because of their size, they're relatively safe as well, and they're modular, so you can put them where you actually want. So it's a new technology. It hasn't been rolled out. The World Bank's official view on this is that it needs to be explored, and we're willing to give grants or lend to countries that want to actually explore this issue, because we really are at the stage of doing the technical analyses, technical and economic analyses. Does it make sense for you? Is it technically feasible? Do you need it? Which then comes slap bang into your point about AI and the data centers. You have not only massive amounts of energy, but massive amounts of water to cool the energy, right? So these are like sinkholes for energy and water. All I will say there is that, I mean, you'll see it in the report somewhere buried towards the end of the report, is we did this analysis by looking at which places are energy rich and water rich. And we discover the majority of the data centers go in water poor centers, water poor areas, arid areas, and not necessarily areas that are well endowed with energy either. So, you know, it's policy and other things that are driving it. So I think the world should begin to think about those issues. I don't know if we're going to get a London consensus. You know, I think there is time for a rethink of the economic paradigm. There's a time for a rethink of the role that the European Union and Europe plays. I think it can play a very distinctive role the way the world is going. And I think it would be good to have competing ideas. Let me just leave it at that. Okay, so let me deal with your very good question on, you know, that I won't mention any country, but what we can say is that we are seeing a lot of global consensuses on environmental issues fraying and countries breaking away. When you're in that sort of world, you need to think differently. You cannot expect everyone to agree with everything that you're going to do. And I think it's quite reasonable, and many people have said this, you can think of clubs of the willing. And so we are willing, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 countries to do X, and we will do X. There will be some countries on the margin that are willing to do Y, but not X. Then you can use that leverage that you have on Y to goad them into joining X. That's called issue linkage. I can link the different issues, and I can get an even bigger consensus. CBAM is an example of that. You want to trade with me? Then I want to say something about your carbon footprint, right? That's a clear example that we have there. Now, your question, again, you know, I won't take the name of any company. Your question on nitrogen, look, it's a very, very big problem that we actually have globally on nitrogen, and it's an under-recognized problem. I mean, I have a whole series of slides, ran out of time, to talk about the damage to fisheries, damage to health, etc., as well as the economic costs of it all. And the really regrettable thing about it is that if you do a benefit cost analysis, the benefit is like $25 for every $1 that you spend to repair the problem. So there are solutions, there are workable solutions, cheap solutions. We just need to go out and do it. But probably the way not to do it is the way that's going to make the farmer vote your government out of power, right? Because one of the things we emphasize throughout the report is don't just look at the economic rate of return, look at the political rate of return. What is the political benefit or the cost from a particular policy? And we emphasize that throughout. It might mean not the best policy, but at least it's a feasible policy. Okay, so we got two there.
My question is that is related to the shipping business.
Related to what, sorry?
The shipping business.
Shipping, yeah.
Now we try, to consume green products like LNG, ammonia, methanol, hydrogono. But I think, in my opinion, this will not be a solution. In my strict opinion is that at the end, we are going to come to the consumption of nuclear power to move the ships. Is that effective? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Equally from the shipping industry, Joe Farrakis from London. Amongst us at the high seas or small gulfs, we see naval ships being moved by nuclear energy. Modern ships today, they're able not to have a nuclear reactor, but to have an atomic battery. And all pacification societies who care about the safety of the planet and the ships and the people, crew or passengers, they're after this. But it is a political decision not to use this. That's why we had on the 4th of November, President Trump said that drill, baby, drill. What's going to happen? So if we are really realistics, we have to use nuclear that Petros began, Mr. Kanellopoulos added, and also our good friend here. Thank you.
Thank you for your. I would like to shift you from your comfort zone of economics to my area, which is cultural anthropology, and focus on arts and philosophy. So we're talking about the future of humanity here, and through a wise handling of nature and the resources. I was wondering, while listening to you, that where is the social factor in all this? Where is the cultural dimension in all this? And finally, isn't this a time to think, to reflect on the fallacy, on a fallacy, on the frenzy of a development that is based on some kind of self-arrogance? That is, who are we on this planet?
Okay, shall I take those questions? So, look, I'll be very quick. It's way beyond my technical knowledge to be able to answer about shipping and nuclear power. But what you two gentlemen have said sounds very convincing to me. You know, the fact that the technology exists, and we may well be in a valley of death situation there as well. That the technology exists, but it requires some regulation, it requires some push, requires some change to make that shift. Otherwise, you know, you've got to wait for your whole investment to depreciate out. And that could be a long, long time. So it sounds very promising the way you're talking, but it's not my area of expertise. Sir, I agree with you. I'm not a...
If you don't achieve, to have a clear involvement, we are bound at the end to go to the nuclear power.
Sure.
By the authorities' decision, not by ourselves. They force us, the International Maritime Organization to do that.
Right.
And we are asking you if this is possible to be done. It will be a bloody mess in shipping because they are the writers. If you go to install your ship instead of giving you a value, a premium for a value 30 million, will be 60 million because this is going to last for 25 years. And the other end says, I'm not going to do it.
Right, right.
This is the problem.
Yeah.
Practical terms.
Yeah.
Understood.
You're absolutely right. You mean humanity? I mean, I don't want to offend anyone, but we are rather arrogant, and we have not done a particularly good job on stewarding the earth and other species. So yes, I'm with you there.
Hello.
Thank you very much. A
One
question.
question from a leader.
Thank you very much, Petros. And you spoke about the problem of water in the Mediterranean and in Greece also. We face a very difficult problem with the water, especially in Attica, Athens, and not only. Would your bank, perhaps through the IFC, would they be willing to co-finance big projects which have to do with water recycling, anyway, water treatment, different ways, but have investments needed here in Greece? And in what way? Thank you very much.
So the very quick answer is absolutely. If the government requests it, water recycling is a very, very important thing that we promote, and also trying to promote it with anywhere that asks, right? Anywhere that asks, and try to promote it also doing it with renewables to the extent possible.
One last one.
Sure. So the question is that people object to the sight of a windmill, some very famous people, as we know, and likewise with solar panels.
And some birds.
Oh, birds certainly do. You can't blame the poor birds, right? So, shows you my bias. So yeah, look, this is an issue, and I think we can solve it both through planning, and we can also solve it through talking to communities. But as an economist, I would say maybe we need to worry a little bit about compensation too, because if I'm spoiling your view and you bought your house and you spent, I don't know, extra 100,000, and suddenly, bang, here comes a windmill, you ought to be compensated for it. So there are countries, you know, where this sort of thing does happen. So I think it's poor planning and poor policy. I don't think it's a fault of the technology necessarily, because don't forget that if you were to have a coal-fired power station, and if you happen to be living downwind of that coal-fired power station, you would not be happy and you would not be doing your children any favors, because as night follows day, they would get asthma and they would never recover from that asthma. So it's, you know, which is the worst? Have you a child with asthma or a child with a bad view? You know, it's like having a bad view.
A final question. No, can I ask you then, would the World Bank, its private sector financing, be willing to look at some Greek companies for financing, mid-sized or large size or minimum size or whatever? Is there a team at the World Bank that will look into financing and making loans to Greek companies, shipping or industry?
So the teams there, certainly there's some country focus, but there also is very much a sector focus. So there's no reason for saying no. If it meets all the objectives, then of course it can happen.
So it is. Where would one look at? Where at the World Bank, whether it's possible to finance?
Go to the IFC, which is the International Finance Corporation website, and then give your contact name depending on where you're, you know, which industry you're talking about and the financing that you can get. Some it's harder than others. If it's very unsustainable, very harmful sort of industries, not that it won't happen, but it's harder to get it than others.
A million thanks. We appreciate it. It was a devastating speech. I think they followed religiously what you said. It was quite amazing. And we're happy that the World Bank deploys and employs people like yourself. So we're good for them. Congratulations to the World Bank, first of all. Thank you.